I drove 4 hours to get to my nephew's baptism. My sister was waiting when I arrived. She stepped directly in front of me and said, "Let's not cause a scene. It's better if you leave." Silently, I just handed her the gift envelope, turned around, and left. She opened it 10 minutes later to find it empty. A note inside read, "Check your joint account." The screaming started before I had even left the parking lot. For 4 hours, I drove thinking I would be one of the most important guests there. Not because I needed the attention, honestly, I hate that kind of spotlight, but because I had earned it. Without me, Jenna wouldn't have gotten through the last year. When the mortgage company started calling, who wired $3,000 back the same day? When her husband lost his job and their utilities were shut off for 3 days, who paid to get the lights and heat back on? When that hospital bill came, the one she swore insurance would cover, who handled it? Me. Every single time. So yes, I thought I would be welcomed with a smile, maybe even a thank you. It was her son's baptism, and I showed up looking like I belonged in the front pew next to the godparents. I had even put a new card and envelope in my jacket pocket before leaving home that morning. What she thought was going to be another fat check from me. The church was huge, shiny, and packed. I pulled into the lot just as the ceremony was starting, parked away from the crowd, and stepped out of the car, straightening my blazer. Jenna was already outside, which I should have known was off. She wasn't greeting guests or helping people inside. She was just standing there, arms crossed, looking straight at me like she'd been waiting. She walked up as if on a schedule. No smile. No "Hey, I'm glad you came." She just said it flatly, like she'd been rehearsing, "Let's not cause a scene. It's better if you leave." I stared at her for a second, thinking I had misheard, that maybe she would follow it up with a joke. But no. She stood there like a bouncer outside a club I didn't belong to. I didn't argue. I just reached into my jacket, pulled out the envelope, and handed it to her. Then I turned around and walked back to the car without a single word. She probably thought I was sulking, that I'd sit there and mope about not being allowed in. The truth was, I didn't care about the event anymore. I cared about what came next. I sat in my car, engine off, staring straight ahead at nothing. There were people laughing somewhere behind me, walking toward the entrance. I wasn't even listening. I was thinking about how long it had taken me to wake up to it all, how long I'd let Jenna play this game with our family. She used me again and again, and our parents backed her every time. 10 minutes later, I heard the side door slam open. She came flying out, heels clicking, holding the envelope like it had burned her hands. She was shouting into her phone, pacing, furious. I knew exactly what she had seen. Inside the envelope was no check, just a plain piece of paper that said, "Check your joint account." The one we'd been using as a buffer for emergencies, the one I funded and she drained. That morning, I had moved every cent into a private account, set up a new savings, changed passwords, and locked her out completely. She had finally hit the limit. She was still yelling into her phone when my dad's truck pulled in. That made me laugh quietly. She had called him the second she read that note. They were about to circle me like vultures, and I knew it. But I wasn't going to move. I wanted them to come. I wanted them to look me in the face and try the same guilt trips and manipulations I'd been swallowing since I was a teenager. I sat there, calm as ever, while the chaos rolled in. They had no idea what kind of day I had planned for them. My dad pulled up like he owned the place, tires screeching a bit as he braked too fast. His old Chevy was half over the parking lines, engine still running. I watched him from my car, arms crossed, window half cracked. I didn't flinch. Mom stepped out on the passenger side, already pointing toward me like she was part of a search team. Jenna waved them over dramatically, yelling something I couldn't hear but didn't need to. Her whole posture said, "Victim." From where I sat, it was almost funny. They marched up to my car together, my dad in the lead, Jenna 2 steps behind like this was some courtroom drama and he was her legal defense. Dad leaned in, voice low, like he didn't want to cause a scene, which was ironic coming from the family that practically thrived on them. You're really going to pull this stunt today on your nephew's baptism? I didn't respond right away, just looked at all three of them. Mom's arms were folded. Jenna was fake crying, and Dad looked like he was waiting for me to explain why the sky was blue. I said calmly, I handed her an envelope at a family event. Isn't that what people do at baptisms? Mom snapped, don't be a smartass, Lisa. You emptied the joint account. Jenna has bills due. She said she was counting on that money to pay the mortgage this week. What were you thinking? I kept my eyes on Jenna. She didn't say a word, just stood there, lips tight, like she couldn't believe this was happening. The funny part was, she actually could believe it. That's why she ran outside 10 minutes after opening the envelope. She knew exactly why I did it. What she didn't expect was that I'd go through with it. I let the silence stretch a bit longer before I reached into the glove compartment, pulled out a folded piece of paper, and held it up just long enough for them to see the bold numbers, $4,000. The real check. I never shredded it. I brought it with me. You were going to give her that? My mom looked like I had just waved a winning lottery ticket in her face. That was the plan. Yeah. If she hadn't told me to leave the second I showed up. Jenna took a step forward. You seriously came all the way here to punish me? No, I came here to celebrate your son. I brought a gift. You told me to leave, so I left. And this? What? This is your revenge? She held up the envelope again like it was a weapon. Mom was nodding beside her, already shifting gears from outrage to disappointed. Lisa, this is childish. You're putting money over family. That's when I realized I'd heard this script a dozen times before. Whenever Jenna did something thoughtless, they circled the wagons. When I stepped back, I was the selfish one. When I didn't offer money fast enough, I was holding a grudge. They never asked how much I'd already given. Never once asked how it affected me. Jenna crossed her arms. At least give me access back to the account, even if there's nothing in it now. Mom jumped on that quick. That's reasonable, Lisa. You can't just freeze her out completely. I looked at all of them. I'll think about it. I shouldn't have said that. The moment it left my mouth, I knew I had made a mistake. Because in this family, I'll think about it wasn't a boundary. It was blood in the water. They were going to keep coming. And I was just getting started pulling back. They didn't leave after I said I'd think about it. That was their invitation to press harder, and they took it. The three of them stood there, just off to the side of my car, whispering like teenagers in trouble. I rolled up my window halfway and turned the air on, letting them stand there and stew in their little circle. Jenna kept glancing over at me like she expected I'd lower the window again, hand her the check, say I was sorry, like she was waiting for me to cave the way I always did. But nothing about me that day was soft. I just stared forward, hands on the steering wheel, waiting them out. Eventually, she turned and stormed back toward the church doors, heels clacking like she wanted everyone to hear how mad she was. Dad said something to Mom before he followed her. Mom lingered a little longer, gave me this tired look, the kind she always used when she thought I'd let the family down. Then she turned and left, too. I waited another 5 minutes, then started the car and drove off. Not home. Not yet. I just needed to not be seen. I ended up at a strip mall 5 minutes away, parked in front of a grocery store, grabbed a coffee I didn't need, and sat there watching a couple argue over a parking spot. That's when it hit me. Something I hadn't thought about in months. The car. The silver 2011 Honda Civic I'd driven for nearly 8 years. I gave it to Jenna and her husband last year when they were down to one car after his little accident. I remember the conversation clear as day. He was apologizing. Jenna was crying and I said, screw it. Just take it. I was planning to sell it, but it felt like the right thing to do at the time. Family needs help. You help. Except it was never treated like a loan or even a gift with gratitude. It just became theirs overnight. No questions asked. No title transfer. I kept paying the insurance for a few months before I realized they hadn't bothered to get their own coverage. That's when I took it off my policy, and still, not a word from either of them. I looked it up in my documents folder on my phone. Registered under my name. No lien, no transfer. Still legally mine. That's all I needed to know. I called the towing company I'd used once before, gave them the license plate number, told them the make, model, and exactly where it was likely parked, behind the church, small lot near the dumpsters where Jenna and her husband always parked when they didn't want their car seen by the front crowd. The guy on the phone said it would be about 45 minutes. I gave him my info and told him to call me when it was done. Then I just sat there sipping coffee that had gone cold, scrolling through my messages, rereading old texts from Jenna asking for money, never once offering to pay anything back. I thought I'd feel bad. I didn't. 40 minutes later, my phone buzzed. They had the car towed without incident. Already on the way to the impound lot, where it would sit under my name until I figured out what to do with it. Back at the church, I imagined Jenna still smiling and mingling, completely unaware her husband's ride home was being hooked and driven away. That was about to be her second surprise of the day. And this time, she wouldn't have anyone else to blame. I stayed in that parking lot longer than I needed to. Not because I was stuck. I just wanted to watch the silence. No buzzing phone, no furious texts, no dramatic voicemails. It was quiet in a way it hadn't been in a long time. I was thinking about heading home when I opened Facebook just out of habit. That's when I saw Jenna's post, a full album already up. The baptism, her in a pale blue dress, their baby in that too big white outfit with lace that looked like it belonged in a costume shop, smiling in every shot. My parents standing proud beside her like nothing had happened. The caption read, "Grateful for the love, the faith, and the people who show up when it matters." A nice little jab there at me. I almost laughed, but something caught my attention. The last photo had stopped loading. I refreshed. The album stalled. The group photo she'd captioned "The whole family" disappeared mid-upload. Only a few photos remained now, like the rest had been ripped out of a scrapbook. The caption was cut off, too, like she had stopped typing mid-sentence. I kept refreshing, but the post didn't change. That's when I knew something had happened. Before I could even guess what it was, my phone rang. Unknown number. Normally, I don't answer those, but I had a feeling. I picked up. It was Jenna's husband. He didn't waste time. "Where the hell is the car?" I told him straight. "It's still registered in my name. I gave it to you because you needed it, but it was never yours. And considering how today went, I figured it was time I took it back." He didn't raise his voice. Not yet. Just asked how I could do that on the day of my nephew's baptism. How I could leave them with no ride, stranded with a baby. But then he said something that stopped me cold. "Jenna told everyone you gave her the account. Said it was a gift. That it was hers." Now I was silent. He went on. "Apparently, she's been telling people you gave her access to the account as a way to make up for missing the baby shower. She said you set it up for her, that you wanted her to have something stable since you weren't involved." My parents believed it. "She's been building that narrative for months. That's why your mom always reacts like you're the one crossing lines when you bring up boundaries. Why your dad told you you had no right to freeze her out." Jenna had painted this whole picture of me as the distant sister trying to buy back guilt. And they all bought it. I hung up without saying another word. I drove straight to the bank. I sat down with a rep, showed my ID, and said I wanted the joint account closed immediately. I wanted her card deactivated, the account flagged for any suspicious activity, and a letter of closure mailed to her address. I could have done it weeks ago, but I wanted to believe she was just careless, not manipulative. I was wrong. She knew exactly what she was doing. As the teller processed it, I remembered something else. Jenna's husband had posted about a job interview earlier in the week. I checked LinkedIn. The job was across town. Without that car, without the account, they were stuck. I left the bank with a printed statement confirming the closure. It felt like taking off a weight I'd been carrying for years without noticing. For a moment, the silence returned, peaceful again. But I knew it wouldn't last. They were going to come after me now. Not just with guilt or yelling. They were going to come begging. The silence didn't just end. It shattered. I woke up to my phone buzzing nonstop. 4 missed calls. 3 voicemails. All before 7 a.m. First was Mom, then Dad, then Jenna twice. The kind of timing that tells you they were sitting together deciding who'd try first. I didn't listen to the voicemails. I didn't need to. The texts filled in the blanks quickly enough. Lisa, we need to talk. This is serious. Please don't ignore us. I have a baby. I can't get to work. Please don't do this. You're not thinking straight. This isn't you. At least give access back to the account until Friday. Please, just until Friday. The last one came from Jenna, and it was a screenshot of her bank account overdrawn by $217. Below it was a crying emoji and a picture of the baby sitting on the living room floor in a diaper. Like she thought that would seal the deal. The same trick she always used. Pity then pressure. An hour later, Mom called again. This time I picked up. Not because I wanted to hear it, but because I knew if I didn't, they'd just keep calling. She didn't even say hello. Are you really doing this to your sister? That was her opener. Not how are you? Not let's talk. Just accusation. She went on, said Jenna was humiliated, that she had to borrow a ride from a neighbor to get to work, that they didn't have enough gas money now, that she was crying all night, that the stress was dangerous with a baby around. She said she didn't understand how I could go from being the most generous one in the family to suddenly acting like a stranger. Then she dropped the line she'd been saving, your father and I think maybe you should talk to someone, this kind of behavior. It's not like you. There it was. The shift. When guilt didn't work, they pivoted to suggesting something was wrong with me. Like setting boundaries after years of being used was a symptom of mental instability. I stayed calm. I told her I was fine. That I had simply decided not to be taken advantage of anymore. That I didn't owe Jenna or anyone endless money just because I didn't have a kid. And then, just when I thought we might end the call in silence, she said something that stuck. If this is about the car, you got it back. But you can't punish a mother like this. That's your nephew. It wasn't about the car. Not really. It was about how easy it was for them to rewrite the story, to make me the villain the second I stopped giving. But they didn't want to hear that. They wanted access back to the account. And they were going to squeeze every emotional pressure point to get it. That afternoon, while I was working from home, the doorbell rang. I opened the door to find the Honda parked across my driveway. No one standing there, just the car and a wrinkled envelope tucked under the windshield wiper. Inside it was a single sheet of paper that read, "You want control? Fine, take it." No keys, no explanation, just drama delivered by vehicle. They'd clearly gone to the impound lot, paid to get it back, then left it at my place like they were throwing a tantrum. What they didn't know is that I still had the spare key in my drawer. I walked over, unlocked it, and drove it around to the back. I didn't even bother texting them. Later that night, Jenna called again, crying this time, full meltdown mode. She said her job was on the line, that she couldn't afford to miss another shift, that everything was falling apart. She said the account was all she had left to get by this week. Just a few days, just until Friday. Her voice broke like she was holding the baby in one arm and the phone in the other. I didn't yell. I didn't lecture. I just said, I'll think about it. And I knew even before she thanked me that I'd made another mistake. Because to Jenna, those 4 words meant the door was still open. That her grip wasn't broken, just weakened. That night, I barely slept. Every time my phone buzzed, I expected it to be another message, a new plea, a fresh guilt trip. They weren't done. They were just warming up. I stared at the last message for over an hour before sending it. No edits, no backspaces. Just one line that had taken me years to arrive at. I've thought about it. The answer is no. I hit send, turned my phone face down on the table, and walked outside. I didn't need to see the reaction. I already knew it. There'd be shock first because Jenna believed deep down that I'd never really pull away, then anger, then the same recycled guilt they always threw at me like a rope assuming I'd grab it. But this time, I didn't. The strange thing was how quiet everything felt after that message. No immediate calls, no buzzing notifications. I thought maybe they'd finally accepted it. Maybe the silence was their answer. Maybe that was it. It wasn't. Later that night, I got a call from Dad. I almost let it ring out, but curiosity got the better of me. He sounded calm. Too calm, like he'd been practicing what to say. "Why don't you come over for dinner? Just talk this out," he said. "Everyone's here. Jenna is ready to apologize." That word apologize landed strange. It didn't belong in her vocabulary, not sincerely. I asked if this was about the account. "No," he said, "this is about family. Let's not let this thing split us apart." I told him I'd think about it. He said, "Okay." I already knew I wasn't going. The next day, Mom sent me a message that started with, "I know you're hurting." The kind of message you send when you're trying to reposition someone else's boundary as a symptom. She said Jenna was under pressure, that being a mother was hard, that sometimes people say things they don't mean, that deep down we're still siblings. Then came the pivot. She said Jenna's husband had just gotten a new job offer and they needed the Honda again, just for a little while until they got back on their feet, that it would mean the world to them, that I wouldn't even have to worry about maintenance. They'd handle everything this time. She wrote, "You always felt good helping others. Let yourself feel that again." I stared at that line. That was the core of it. That's what they'd counted on all along. That I'd feel good playing the role they carved out for me. The reliable one. The one who sacrificed without being asked. Who always paid, always forgave, always returned. I didn't reply. Instead, I pulled the spare key from my drawer, drove the Honda to a dealership 2 towns over, and sold it. No fanfare, no big moment, just clean paperwork, a decent offer, and a signature that felt more freeing than any therapy session I'd ever been talked into. The guy at the dealership asked why I was selling. I told him it was time. That's all. When I got home, I logged into my bank and confirmed the joint account was fully closed. Nothing pending, no cards still linked, just gone. Then I blocked their numbers one by one. Mom, Dad, Jenna. It felt extreme even as I did it. Like I was hitting some irreversible switch, but it wasn't a tantrum. It wasn't revenge. It was self-respect 20 years late. They had crossed a line they didn't think existed. And now they were on the other side of it. I haven't heard from any of them since. No letters, no surprise visits, nothing. I don't know what they're telling people. Probably that I snapped, that I need help, that I turned my back on the people who loved me most. But I sleep better now. I don't jump when my phone buzzes. I don't check my balance every morning out of habit. I don't carry that low-level exhaustion that comes from always being the backup plan. Jenna has her life, and now I finally have mine back. 2 months passed with silence so deep, I started to think maybe they'd finally let it go. I wasn't naive enough to believe they'd changed, but I thought maybe they'd shifted their attention somewhere else. Jenna always needed a new crisis, and maybe I was no longer useful in that storyline. I started feeling like myself again, not the version they sculpted for their convenience, but the one I'd slowly been rebuilding in the quiet. I was sleeping better, working with more focus. I'd even started dating again, something I hadn't had the mental space for in years. And then out of nowhere, I got a letter in the mail. Not a card, not a typed note, a real letter, handwritten, folded carefully into an envelope with my name scrolled across the front in Jenna's unmistakable handwriting. I almost didn't open it. I stood in my kitchen for a long time, just staring at it. Inside, it started with something unexpected. I guess you think I'm the villain in all this. No apology, no admission, just that sentence like we were debating a movie and not a years-long pattern of manipulation. She said she wanted to explain things. Said she was in a hard place and didn't know how else to survive. Said she leaned on me because I was the only person who ever came through and that somewhere along the line she stopped seeing me as a person and more as a solution. She said the lies about the joint account got away from her, that she didn't mean for them to last that long, that by the time I found out, she didn't know how to backpedal without losing face. And then near the end, she wrote this, "I'm not asking for money. I just want to know if we'll ever speak again." I read it twice, then once more a few days later. It wasn't quite manipulative. Not this time. But it also wasn't a true apology. There was no ownership. No sentence that began with, "I was wrong." Just a long letter about how hard her life had become without me propping it up. I didn't write back. Instead, I took a walk, thought about everything that had happened, everything I let happen. And then I wrote a note, just a few lines. I didn't send it, but I keep it in a drawer now. Something to read when I start wondering if I was too harsh. It says, "It's not that I hate you. It's that I finally love myself enough to stop letting you drain me." And that's the part none of them ever seem to understand. Loving yourself isn't a betrayal. It isn't abandonment. It's just overdue. I spent years being the reliable one, the fallback, the fixer, the family ATM. And the more I gave, the more invisible I became, not just to them, but to myself. They didn't see me. They saw what I could offer, and when I stopped offering, they acted like I vanished, like I'd stolen something from them instead of reclaiming something that was mine to begin with. I think about the car sometimes, not because I miss it, but because of what it represented. I used to feel guilty about taking it back, about selling it, about making them walk. But now I realize I'd been walking alone for years. They just finally noticed. I don't know if Jenna ever told the truth about the account or if she still spins the story like I abandoned her during some crisis. Maybe she says I'm unstable or bitter or jealous. Maybe she tells people I snapped. Maybe she believes it. But I've stopped trying to correct the narrative because the people who want to believe that version of me aren't the people I need to keep close. I used to think family was a fact, a permanent, unchangeable thing, something you endure, something you owe. Now I think it's a choice. And I choose not to be the one who's always last in line for compassion. I choose not to be the fixer anymore. Not because I stopped caring, but because I started healing. Healing isn't loud. It's not dramatic. It's quiet. It's slow. It's mornings without dread. Afternoons without obligation. Nights without rehearsing what you'll say if they call again. It's deleting a text draft you don't need to send. It's walking past a photo without bracing yourself. It's remembering a hurt without reopening the wound. It's blocking their numbers and not unblocking them. It's driving home and not checking the rearview mirror. It's standing in your own kitchen with your own peace and realizing you're not waiting for the next ask, the next guilt trip, the next favor disguised as a crisis. It's waking up and knowing that silence isn't punishment, it's protection. Some days I still wonder if they'll try again, if they'll find a new angle, a softer script, a new way to pull me back into orbit. But I also know this, I'm not standing where they left me. I moved on. And not in anger, not in spite, but in truth. The truth that loving people doesn't mean enabling them. The truth that setting a boundary isn't cruelty. It's clarity. The truth that sometimes the most radical thing you can do is choose yourself. And I did. I chose Lisa. And for the first time in a long, long time, I didn't feel guilty about it. That note in the drawer became my anchor. On days when the old guilt tried to creep back in, I'd take it out and read those 2 lines. It's not that I hate you. It's that I finally love myself enough to stop letting you drain me. It was a mantra that rewired my thinking. The silence from my family was no longer an absence, it was a presence. The presence of my own life, finally being lived for me. I started making decisions based on what I wanted, not on how they would be perceived. I painted my living room a color my mother would have hated. I took a weekend trip alone, something Jenna would have labeled selfish. I said no to friends without offering a long, justifying excuse. I was practicing, in a world without their constant criticism, how to simply be. Then, about 5 months after the baptism, my father showed up at my door. It was a Saturday morning. I was in sweatpants, drinking coffee, and planning my day. The doorbell rang, and through the peephole, I saw him standing there, alone. He looked older, his shoulders slumped in a way I hadn't seen before. He wasn't in his fixer posture. This was different. For a long moment, I considered not answering. The peace I had built felt fragile, and his presence was a potential wrecking ball. But the curiosity, and maybe a shred of that old daughterly instinct, won out. I opened the door. "Lisa," he said, his voice softer than I expected. "Dad. Can I come in?" I stepped aside, letting him enter my sanctuary. He looked around the living room, taking in the new paint, the books on the shelves that were all mine, the absence of any family photos. He didn't comment. We sat in the quiet for a minute, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound. "I'm not here to fight," he began, his hands folded in his lap. "Your mother doesn't know I'm here." That got my attention. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," he continued, not quite meeting my eyes. "About a lot of things. The account. The car. The baptism." He paused, gathering his words. "Jenna, she's not doing well. That job fell through. They're staying with us for a while." I didn't say anything. I just waited. This was his script to perform, not mine to interrupt. He finally looked at me. She told us you gave her that account. As a gift." We believed her. I believed her. He let out a long, weary breath. It was only after everything blew up that I started putting pieces together. Old conversations. Things that didn't add up. I looked at my own records, the times your mother and I had to help her out. I saw the pattern. He was quiet again, struggling. "I failed you, Lisa. I was so busy putting out Jenna's fires, I never stopped to see who was getting burned. I treated you like you were unbreakable. And that was wrong." This wasn't the rehearsed calm from the phone call. This was raw, and it was real. It wasn't the full-throated apology I might have once dreamed of, but it was an acknowledgement. It was a crack in their united front. "I can't change what happened," he said. "And I can't speak for your mother or your sister. But I wanted you to hear it from me. I was wrong." I looked at my father, really looked at him, and saw not the patriarch enforcing peace at any cost, but a tired man who had finally seen the cost. The weight of his admission hung in the air between us. "Thank you for telling me, Dad," I said, my voice even. He nodded, seeming to understand that was all he was going to get. No instant forgiveness. No tearful reunion. He stood up to leave. At the door, he turned. "You look good, Lisa. You look peaceful." "I am," I said. And I meant it. He left, and I closed the door. I didn't cry. I didn't feel a surge of victory. I felt a quiet, profound settling. His visit didn't fix anything, but it did something more important, it validated my reality. I hadn't been crazy. I hadn't been cruel. I had been telling the truth, and finally, someone from the other side had seen it. I never did get a similar letter or visit from my mother or Jenna. The family narrative, I learned through a distant cousin, had indeed been that I had changed and cut them off. But the sting was gone. My father's quiet visit had taken the poison out of their story. The rest of my healing wasn't about them anymore. It was about me. It was about learning that my worth wasn't tied to my utility. It was about building a family of choice, friends who showed up without being asked, who celebrated my successes without a hint of jealousy, who loved me for my company, not my capacity to solve their problems. I think about that baptism day often. Not with anger, but as a turning point. It was the day I stopped handing out envelopes full of myself to people who would just toss them aside. It was the day I finally gave the most important gift to the person who needed it most. I gave Lisa her life back. And I never, ever asked for it back. A year to the day after the baptism, I was packing for a week-long hiking trip. It was something I'd always wanted to do but had never made the time for, always tethered to my phone, waiting for the next family emergency. My backpack was by the door, a tangible symbol of my new freedom, when my phone lit up with a notification. It was a calendar reminder I'd forgotten I'd set, Nephew's first birthday. I stared at it, my hand pausing as I rolled a pair of socks. A whole year. The ghost of that day, the shiny church, Jenna's cold stare, the screaming in the parking lot, flickered behind my eyes, but it was distant now, like a movie I'd seen long ago. There was no pang of guilt, no ache of loss. Just a quiet acknowledgement of the date. I swiped the notification away and finished packing. I didn't go to the party. I knew, without a doubt, that I wasn't invited, and more importantly, that I didn't want to be. I was halfway up a mountain trail when I imagined it was happening. I pictured the balloons, the cake, my parents, and Jenna performing their version of a happy family. The thought was like watching a scene through a thick pane of glass. I could see it, but I couldn't hear the sound, and I felt none of the weather inside. While they were celebrating, I was standing on a summit, the wind pulling at my hair, looking out at a horizon that seemed to stretch forever. The silence up there was different from the silence in my kitchen. It was vast and ancient, and it made my own quiet feel powerful, not lonely. I took a picture of the view, not to post, but for myself. A marker. This is where I was on the day I truly knew I was free. A few weeks after I returned, tanned and grounded from the trip, I got an email. It was from my mother. The subject line was just hello. My first instinct was a cold knot in my stomach, a relic of the old programming. But it loosened quickly. I didn't have to open it. I could delete it and continue my day, untouched. Curiosity, once again, won out. It was brief. Lisa. I hope you are well. Your father told me he saw you. He said you looked happy. I'm glad. I know things have been difficult. I won't pretend to understand all of your choices, but I am trying. Jenna and her family have moved into an apartment closer to town. It's for the best. Maybe one day, when you're ready, we could have coffee. No pressure. Just a thought. Love. Mom. It was the most neutral, non-confrontational message she had ever sent me. There were no accusations, no guilt trips, no talk of money or cars or what I owed anyone. It was an olive branch, brittle and tentative, but an olive branch nonetheless. It acknowledged a separation without demanding a reunion. I didn't reply immediately. I sat with it for a few days. The part of me that had built a strong, beautiful life wanted to ignore it, to protect my hard-won peace. But the part of me that remembered baking cookies with her as a child, before Jenna's needs consumed everything, felt a small, quiet pull. I realized that healing wasn't a fortress I had to defend at all costs. True peace was sturdy enough to withstand a polite email. A week later, I wrote back. Mom. Thank you for your email. I am well. The hiking trip was good for me. I'm glad everyone is settled. Coffee one day could be nice. I'll let you know when I'm ready. Lisa. It was polite. It was distant. It was honest. I wasn't ready yet, and for the first time, I felt no anxiety about stating that, even implicitly. I had set the timeline. I was in control. The exchange felt like closing a final loop. The war was over. There were no winners or losers, just a negotiated peace. My life was no longer a reaction to theirs. It was its own, separate story. I finally sold the Honda Civic, the last physical tether to that old life. The money went into my new savings account, the one with only my name on it. I used a small part of it to buy a professional coffee maker. Every morning, the rich, steady gurgle it makes is a sound I associate with my own choices, my own comfort, my own home. Sometimes, I still wonder what Jenna tells people about me. But the wondering is fleeting, a cloud that passes without raining on my day. Her narrative no longer has the power to define me. My truth is here, in the quiet of my mornings, the freedom of my weekends, and the solid, unshakable knowledge that I built this life myself. I chose myself. And I continue to choose myself every single day. It's a habit now. The best one I've ever formed. The coffee invitation with my mother hung in the air for another 6 months. It wasn't a stalemate, it was a period of quiet assessment. I was living my life, and I assumed she was living hers. The world hadn't ended because we weren't in each other's pockets. In fact, my world had become significantly more stable. I focused on my career, receiving a promotion that came with a significant raise. The extra money felt different this time. It wasn't a buffer for someone else's emergency, it was fuel for my own future. I opened a retirement account, something I'd always neglected, telling myself I had too many present-day obligations to think that far ahead. Now, watching the numbers compound, I felt a deep, satisfying sense of providing for myself. I also started volunteering. It was a local animal shelter, a place where help was received with unconditional, tail-wagging gratitude. There were no scripts, no manipulations, just the simple, honest work of cleaning kennels and walking dogs. One afternoon, I was playing with a scruffy terrier mix who had been surrendered, and it hit me, I was finally giving my energy to something that wouldn't drain me, but would, in fact, fill me back up. The parallel was so stark it was almost funny. It was after a particularly fulfilling Saturday at the shelter, my clothes smelling faintly of disinfectant and dog, that I felt it. A simple, unforced readiness. I was in my car, and without overthinking it, I opened my email and typed a reply to my mother's old message. Mom. Are you free for coffee next Saturday, say 10 a.m. at the Daily Grind? Lisa. I hit send before I could dissect the decision. The response came within an hour. I am free. I'll be there. Thank you, Lisa. Mom. The week passed without anxiety. I wasn't rehearsing arguments or steeling myself for an attack. I was just a woman who was going to have coffee with her mother. When Saturday came, I arrived exactly on time. The Daily Grind was neutral territory, a bright, modern cafe we'd never been to together. I saw her before she saw me. She was sitting at a small table by the window, her hands wrapped around a mug, staring out at the street. She looked smaller, and for the first time I saw her not as my antagonist, but as a woman who had also been trapped in a system of her own making. She turned as I approached, and a cautious, tentative smile touched her lips. Lisa. Hi, Mom. I sat down. The silence that followed wasn't hostile, it was the quiet of two people recalibrating. You look well, she said, her eyes scanning my face. Healthy. I am, I said, and meant it. I've been hiking. And I volunteer at the animal shelter now. Her eyebrows rose in genuine surprise. The animal shelter? You always were allergic to dogs. I got shots, I said with a small shrug. It was worth it. We talked like that for an hour, skirting the deep chasms and sticking to the solid ground of the present. She told me about a gardening class she was taking. I told her about my promotion. We talked about books, about the unseasonably warm weather. It was superficial, but it was civil. It was a new language we were learning, one without the vocabulary of guilt and obligation. As we were finishing our drinks, she looked down at her hands, then back at me. Jen is talking about going back to school, she said, her voice careful. Online classes. For bookkeeping. That's good, I said neutrally. I hope it works out for her. There was a pause. She was choosing her words with immense care. It's been a difficult year for her. A learning experience. I nodded, sipping my coffee. I wouldn't give her more than that. I wouldn't absolve or condemn. She seemed to understand. She didn't push. Instead, she said, "Your father, he's different now. Quieter. I think he's finally seeing things." She didn't elaborate on what things were, and I didn't ask. When we stood to leave, there was an awkward moment at the door. The old script would have demanded a hug, a performative display of reconciliation. We both seemed to sense it wouldn't be authentic. She simply reached out and patted my arm, a brief, dry contact. "Thank you for the coffee, Lisa. Thank you for coming, Mom." I watched her walk to her car, a solitary figure in the parking lot. There was no dramatic closure, no tearful apology that erased the past. But there was something new, a respectful distance. A recognition that I was a separate entity, with my own borders and my own sovereignty. Driving home, I felt a profound sense of calm. The meeting hadn't healed the old wounds, but it had proven they were finally scabbed over. They no longer dictated my every move. I had sat across from the architect of so much of my old pain and felt nothing but a mild, detached compassion. The family I'd been born into was no longer a source of my identity. It was a fact of my history, like the town I grew up in. It had shaped me, but it didn't contain me. My real family was the life I had built, the friends who checked in on me, the dogs at the shelter who wagged their tails when I arrived, the quiet confidence of my own company. I pulled into my driveway, the same one where the Honda had been dumped in a fit of dramatic pique. Now, it was just my driveway. My home. My peace. I turned off the engine and sat for a moment in the perfect, uninterrupted silence. It was no longer something I was guarding. It was just my life. And it was more than enough. The civil, surface-level détente with my mother held. We began having coffee every few months, a ritual that remained firmly in the shallow end of the pool. We discussed her garden, my job, a documentary she'd seen. It was like conversing with a pleasant acquaintance. The absence of depth was no longer a wound, it was a relief. It was all the relationship could healthily bear. Meanwhile, my own life deepened in ways I'd never allowed before. I started dating a man named David, a quiet, steady architect I'd met at a bookstore. The first time he offered to pay for dinner, my instinct was a wave of suspicion, bracing for the implied debt. He noticed my hesitation. "It's just dinner, Lisa," he'd said, his tone kind and unpressured. "Not a contract." That sentence alone felt revolutionary. With him, and with the circle of friends I'd cultivated, everything was straightforward. Favors were returned. Feelings were communicated. No was accepted without negotiation. I was learning, in my mid-30s, what healthy reciprocity actually looked like. Nearly 2 years after the baptism, I was at my desk when a FedEx envelope arrived. The return address was from a law firm I didn't recognize. The old, familiar dread tried to spike my heart rate, but it was a faint echo now, easily quieted. I opened it calmly. It was a formal notice. My grandmother, my father's mother, had passed away. She had left me something in her will. The letter requested my presence at the reading. Nana had been the one quiet, constant supporter in the family chaos. She was the one who'd sent me birthday cards with a little cash long after I was an adult, with a note that always read, "For something fun, just for you." She had seen the dynamic, I realized now. She had known. The funeral was small, in her hometown chapel. I drove down alone, my heart heavy with a clean, uncomplicated grief. I saw my family across the aisle. Jenna, her husband, their son, a toddler now. My parents. We exchanged brief, somber nods. The battlefield of the baptism was hallowed ground here, and we were all just mourners. After the service, we gathered in a sterile conference room at the lawyer's office. The air was thick with a tension that had nothing to do with grief. Jenna kept glancing at me, a calculating look in her eyes. My mother looked nervous. The lawyer, a kind-faced older man, began reading. He left my father the bulk of her estate, the house, and its contents. He left my mother some jewelry. Then he came to me. To my granddaughter, Lisa, he read, his voice clear in the quiet room. I leave my porcelain tea set, and the sum of $50,000. A sharp intake of breath came from Jenna's direction. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. The lawyer continued, but I barely heard him. He was explaining that Nana had specified this was from a separate account she had maintained independently, and that the funds were for me, to secure a peace she felt I had always deserved. Jenna was given a small, token amount. It was a deliberate, powerful message from beyond the grave. My grandmother had seen the imbalance, and with the unassailable finality of a legal document, she had tried to correct it. The moment the lawyer finished, Jenna stood up, her chair scraping loudly. This is ridiculous. She barely even visited. Her voice was a shrill whip crack in the quiet room. I didn't look at her. I looked at my father. He was staring at the table, a single tear tracing a path down his cheek. He wasn't crying for the money. He was crying, I knew, because his mother had seen a truth he had refused to see for so long. Jenna, not here, my mother whispered, pulling at her arm. But Jenna was beyond listening. She turned her fury on me. You did this. You turned her against me. I slowly gathered my copy of the documents, stood up, and smoothed my dress. I looked at my sister, truly looked at her, and felt nothing but a vast, weary pity. The monster I had fought for so long was just a small, desperate person in a cheap black dress, forever trapped in a prison of her own making. No, Jenna, I said, my voice calm and low. I didn't have to. You did that all by yourself. I turned to the lawyer. Thank you, I said. Then I walked out of the room, leaving their stunned silence behind me. I drove to Nana's empty house, as per the lawyer's instructions, to collect the tea set. Letting myself in, the smell of her, lavender and old books, wrapped around me. The tea set was in its customary place in the china cabinet. As I carefully wrapped each delicate cup in newspaper, I found a small, folded note tucked under the sugar bowl. In her spidery handwriting, it read, My dearest Lisa, don't you dare feel guilty. Buy a house. See the world. Live a life so full and happy it makes them dizzy. You have my heart. Always. Nana. I sat on her floral carpet and finally let the tears come. They weren't tears of sadness for the family I'd lost, but of overwhelming gratitude for the one person who had truly seen me, and who had loved me enough to give me the tools for my own freedom. The money wasn't a windfall. It was an affirmation. It was my grandmother's voice, joining my own, telling me I had been right all along. I drove home that night with the tea set carefully boxed in my trunk and a profound sense of legacy in my heart. The past was finally, completely, settled. The future was entirely, blessedly, my own. The inheritance from Nana was a quiet earthquake. It didn't change my daily life, but it shifted the bedrock beneath it. The money sat in a high-yield savings account, a tangible representation of being seen and validated. I didn't touch it for months. I wanted her gift to be a foundation, not a quick fix. I was learning the difference. The fallout from the will was swift and, for me, distant. My phone, which had been peacefully silent, buzzed with a series of texts from Jenna, a chaotic mix of accusation, self-pity, and a thinly veiled request for a loan from Mike's sudden fortune. I didn't respond. I had finally learned that my silence was not a void for them to fill with their noise, it was a wall, and the bricks were mine to lay. A few weeks later, my father called. His voice was heavy. Your mother is upset about the will, he said, choosing his words with diplomatic care. I know, I replied, my tone neutral. How are you, Dad? He was silent for a moment, thrown by the question. I'm managing. The house is full of memories. It's harder than I thought. We talked about Nana for a little while, about his childhood, about the tea set he remembered her using on special occasions. It was the first real, heartfelt conversation we'd had in over a decade. He didn't mention Jenna or the money again. This became our new pattern. He would call every few Sundays, and we would talk about neutral, often meaningful, things. We were building a new relationship, one that existed outside the toxic ecosystem of the rest of the family. It was fragile, but it was real. Meanwhile, my life with David grew roots. We moved in together, into a light-filled apartment with a balcony that overlooked a park. The process of merging our lives was surprisingly free of friction. There was no power struggle, no tallying of who paid for what. When we bought a new sofa, we split the cost without discussion. It was so simple, so profoundly normal, that it sometimes took my breath away. This was what people meant by partnership. One evening, about a year after Nana's passing, I was setting the table for dinner when I used one of the delicate cups from her porcelain tea set. I didn't save it for a special occasion. I decided that a quiet Tuesday dinner with a man I loved was occasion enough. David admired it, running a finger over the gilded rim. "It's beautiful," he said. "It suits you." As I looked at the cup, sitting so perfectly next to our everyday plates, I had a realization. The tea set wasn't a relic from a broken past. It was a part of my present, a beautiful object to be used and enjoyed. The inheritance wasn't just money in a bank, it was permission to fully inhabit my own life. The next day, I logged into my bank account. I transferred a sizable portion of the inheritance into a diversified investment portfolio. I used another portion to pay off the remainder of my student loans. The feeling of watching that balance hit zero wasn't excitement, it was a deep, settling finality. The last of the old, obligatory debts was gone. With the remainder, I did what Nana had told me to do. I started looking at houses. Not as an investment, but as a home. A permanent one. The search was joyful. I wasn't frantic or desperate. I took my time. David came with me, his architect's eye pointing out the good bones of a place, the potential for light. We found it 6 months later, a small, sturdy craftsman-style house with a big backyard for a future dog. It needed work, but it felt like us. The day we closed, I walked through the empty rooms, the keys heavy in my hand. Sunlight streamed through the bay window in the living room. I could picture Nana's tea set on a shelf here. I could see our lives unfolding in this space. This wasn't an escape from anything. It was an arrival. That night, we ordered pizza and sat on the floor, surrounded by boxes. My phone buzzed. It was a text from my mother. Just a single line. "Your father told me you bought a house. Congratulations." I looked at the message for a long moment. Then I typed back, simply, "Thank you." There was no invitation to see it, no promise of a housewarming gift. The boundary was firm, but the tone was civil. It was enough. I put my phone down and leaned against David, listening to the unfamiliar, comforting sounds of our new home. The quiet here was different from the silence in my old apartment. That had been a silence of recovery, of holding my breath. This was a silence of contentment, of a story finally beginning exactly where it was meant to. The past was a closed door behind me. I had no desire to ever open it again. Life in the craftsman house settled into a rhythm that was both comforting and exhilarating. The work of making it ours, sanding floors, painting walls, arguing good-naturedly over tile samples, was a kind of therapy. We were building something together, from the ground up, with no old ghosts in the foundation. I used a small slice of Nana's inheritance to install a bay window in the kitchen, exactly where I'd envisioned it. Every morning, as I drank my coffee there, the sunlight pouring through the glass felt like her approval, warm on my skin. David and I adopted a dog, a gentle, graying Labrador mix from the shelter where I still volunteered. We named him Barnaby. His peaceful presence, the soft thump of his tail on the hardwood floors, completed the picture of a life I had once thought was only for other people. The communications from my family dwindled to a trickle, then to nothing. My father's Sunday calls became less frequent, eventually settling into a pattern of birthday and holiday check-ins. They were brief, warm, and surface level. It was all I needed, and I think, all he could manage. The bridge between us was stable, but it was narrow, and we had both learned to tread carefully. I thought that was the end of the story. That the final page had been turned. I was wrong. It was a rainy Tuesday afternoon, over 3 years since the baptism, when the past tapped me on the shoulder in the most mundane of places, the supermarket. I was comparing prices on pasta sauce, Barnaby waiting patiently in the car, when I heard a small, clear voice say, "Aunt Lisa?" I froze. The jar in my hand felt suddenly heavy. I turned slowly. He was taller than I remembered, his baby fat gone, replaced by the lanky frame of a little boy. It was my nephew. Standing behind him, one hand on his shoulder and a cart filled with generic brand groceries, was Jenna. Time seemed to warp. She looked tired. Not the dramatic, performative exhaustion of old, but a deep, genuine weariness. Her clothes were clean but faded, and there was no wedding ring on her finger. The confrontation I had braced for years didn't come. She just looked at me, her expression unreadable. "Hi," she said, her voice quiet. "Hi," I replied, my own voice steady. My nephew, oblivious to the tectonic plates shifting in the cereal aisle, tugged on her sleeve. "Mom, can we get the ones with the marshmallows?" "Not today, sweetie," she said, her eyes never leaving mine. There was a long, silent pause, filled only by the store's music and the rattle of another cart. "He looks like you," I said finally, because it was true, and it was a safe, human thing to say. A flicker of something, surprise, maybe gratitude, crossed her face. "Yeah," she said softly. "Everyone says that." We stood there, two strangers bound by a painful history, with a child between us as the only living proof of it. "I heard you bought a house," she said. "I did." "That's good. I'm glad you're doing well." It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a plea. It was just a statement. An acknowledgement that my life had continued, and had, in fact, prospered without her in it. "You too," I said, the polite lie feeling like a necessary kindness in that moment. She gave a small, tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Come on, buddy," she said to her son, "let's go find the milk." She pushed her cart past me. My nephew looked back over his shoulder and gave me a small, curious wave. I lifted my fingers in return. I stood there for a long time after they turned the corner, my heart thumping a slow, heavy rhythm in my chest. The encounter hadn't been explosive. It had been sad. A quiet, melancholy coda to a loud and violent symphony. I finished my shopping in a daze. When I got back to the car, Barnaby licked my hand, bringing me back to the present, to my life. That night, as David and I made dinner together in our bright kitchen, I told him about it. "It sounds anticlimactic," he said, chopping vegetables with a steady hand. "I think that's the point," I realized aloud. There was no big moment. No dramatic reconciliation. She's just a person living her life, and I'm a person living mine. Our stories don't intersect anymore. And in that lack of drama, I found a final, profound sense of closure. The saga was over not with a bang, but with a whisper in a grocery aisle. The villain had faded into a tired, single mother, and the heroine was no longer a heroine, just a woman content in her own kitchen. I went to the bay window and looked out at our backyard, at the rain-soaked garden we were planning. The storm had passed. The air was clean. The story was, at long last, complete. And I was finally, unequivocally, free to stop telling it. The grocery store encounter settled inside me like sediment, and by the next morning, the water of my life was clear again. The brief, jarring ripple had smoothed out, leaving no permanent mark. Jenna was no longer a ghost in my machine, she was just a person I used to know. Life moved forward with a gentle momentum. David and I got married in our backyard under a canopy of string lights, surrounded by a small circle of friends. My father came, alone. He gave me a hug that felt genuine, his voice thick with an emotion he couldn't name. "Your mother sends her love," he said, a diplomatic formality I accepted with a nod. It was enough. His presence was the olive branch, and I took it without needing the whole tree. We honeymooned in Italy, using another piece of Nana's gift. We drank wine in sun-drenched piazzas, and I didn't once think about joint accounts or family drama. The world was vast, and my place in it was small and happy. Years folded into one another. The Craftsman house became a home, its walls holding our laughter, our quiet conversations, the scent of our shared life. We never had children, a conscious choice that brought us no regret, only a different kind of fulfillment. Our family was us, and Barnaby, and the network of friends who became our chosen kin. I left my corporate job and, using the financial security Nana had provided, started a small consulting business from my home office. It was work that engaged my mind without consuming my soul. I had time to read, to garden, to be still. The low-level exhaustion that had been my constant companion for decades was a distant memory. One autumn, decades after the baptism, my father passed away. It was peaceful, in his sleep. I felt a clean, sharp grief for the man he was at the end, the one who tried, in his own limited way, to connect. At the funeral, my mother, now frail and leaning on a walker, held my hand for a long moment. Her eyes, clouded with age and loss, met mine. She was wrong, you know, she whispered, her voice raspy. Jenna. About so many things. It was the closest she would ever come to a direct apology, and in that moment, it felt like more than enough. The need for a full accounting had died long ago. Jenna was there, her son, now a young man, standing protectively beside her. We exchanged a look across the crowded room, a simple, mutual acknowledgement of a shared loss. There was no animosity left. The fire had burned down to cold, gray ash. We were two old women, bound by a history that had lost its power to wound. After the service, as people milled about, my nephew approached me. Aunt Lisa, he said, and the title, once so loaded, now felt simple and true. I'm Alex. It's good to finally see you. We talked for a few minutes. He was in college, studying engineering. He was kind, and bright, and entirely his own person. He was the one beautiful, unspoiled thing to come out of all that chaos. Meeting him felt like discovering a rare flower growing in the cracks of a ruined castle. In my 70s now, I sit on the porch of the Craftsman house, a blanket over my knees. David brings me a cup of tea in one of Nana's porcelain cups. The gilding is slightly faded from decades of use, and I love it more for its wear. Barnaby has been gone for many years, replaced by a lazy cat who suns himself on the railing. My life has not been extraordinary by the world's standards. There were no great fame or monumental achievements. But it has been a good life. A whole life. My own. I think of Jenna sometimes, wondering if she ever found a way to fill the void inside her that wasn't with other people's resources. I hope she did. But her journey is no longer any concern of mine. The past is a country I visited long ago. I remember the terrain, the scorched earth of the baptism, the cold mountains of estrangement, the slow, fertile valley of recovery. But I don't live there anymore. The story I lived was not the one I was born into. It was the one I chose, brick by patient brick, boundary by hard-won boundary. It was the story of learning that love shouldn't cost you your soul, and that family isn't a cage you're born into, but a shelter you build for yourself. The silence around me now is not the silence of exclusion or punishment. It is the rich, deep silence of contentment. It is the sound of a story that has been fully told, its conflicts resolved, its themes realized. I close my eyes, feel the sun on my face, and listen. It is the most beautiful sound I have ever known. There is a peculiar grace that comes with true closure. It's not a loud, celebratory fanfare, but a quiet hum that becomes the background music of your life. The sharp edges of the past are worn smooth by the river of time, until they are just interesting stones you occasionally turn over in your palm before letting them sink back into the current. David and I grew old together in our Craftsman house. The vibrant red we'd painted the front door had faded to a soft, weathered rose, much like us. Our lives were a tapestry of small, cherished rituals, the Saturday crossword puzzle done side by side at the kitchen table, The evening walks around the neighborhood where we'd note the changes in people's gardens, the quiet companionship of reading in the same room, the soft rustle of pages, a comfortable language between us. My consulting business had long since been retired. I filled my days with volunteering at the local library, reading to children whose wide-eyed wonder was a balm to my soul. I never had my own grandchildren, but in those storytime circles, I felt a different, gentle kind of legacy, passing on a love for stories, for possibilities that weren't dictated by bloodline. One crisp October afternoon, a letter arrived. The handwriting on the envelope was unfamiliar, a shaky scrawl. Inside was a single, lined sheet of paper. Lisa. I don't expect a reply. I'm writing this from hospice. They say I don't have long. I've had a lot of time to think in this sterile room, with nothing but the beeping of machines and my own regrets for company. I was a terrible sister to you. I was a black hole, and I used you as my fuel. I told myself 1,000 stories to justify it, that you were stronger, that you owed me, that family meant never saying no. They were all lies. The truth was simpler and uglier. I was selfish, and you were kind. You were right to walk away. It was the kindest thing anyone has ever done for me, even though it felt like the cruelest at the time. It forced me to finally stand on my own, however wobbly my legs were. It was hard. It was so hard. But I did it. Alex is a good man. He's nothing like me. He's steady. He visits me. He doesn't know the whole story, and I'd like to keep it that way. I want him to remember something better of me. I don't ask for your forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I just wanted you to know that I finally see it. I see the truth of what I did, and I see the strength it took for you to stop me. I hope your life has been as peaceful as you deserved. Jenna. I read the letter once, then folded it neatly and placed it back in the envelope. I felt a profound, quiet sadness, not for the sister I lost, but for the woman she could have been, and for the years we both wasted in a war of attrition. There was no anger left. No triumph. Just a weary, compassionate understanding. I showed the letter to David. He read it silently, then took my hand. What will you do? He asked. Nothing, I said. And it was the right answer. Any response would have been for me, not for her. She had unburdened her conscience. To engage would have been to re-enter a dance we had both stopped dancing long ago. Her peace, and mine, depended on letting it be. Jenna died a week later. Alex called to tell me, his voice steady and mature. I offered my condolences, genuine in their simplicity. I did not go to the funeral. My chapter with Jenna had closed in that grocery aisle years before. This was just the official stamp on the last page. My mother passed a few years after, and with her, the final, fragile thread to my birth family was severed. The estate was handled by lawyers. I inherited a few pieces of her jewelry, which I put in a box in the attic. They were artifacts from a civilization I no longer lived in. Now, in the deep winter of my life, I sit by my bay window and watch the seasons turn. The story feels complete. The passionate, wounded young woman I once was feels like a character from a powerful novel I read long ago. I remember her pain, her fury, her desperate strength, but I no longer inhabit her skin. The journey was longer and more arduous than I could have ever imagined, but it led me here. To this chair. To this window. To this quiet, unwavering love that has filled my home for decades. I chose myself. And in doing so, I built a life so full, so resilient, and so deeply my own, that the storms of the past can now only be remembered, not felt. The silence is no longer a weapon or a shield. It is simply the sound of my own contentment, a melody I composed myself, note by deliberate note, until it became the only song I needed to hear.